This video is an introduction to Adobe XD. Adobe XD is a design tool that lets you create prototypes of user interfaces. What we're looking at right now is the screen that you see when you first start it. And what you typically do is you begin by picking a platform that you want to design on. If you don't like the size they show there, you can bring down the arrow and it'll show you different other sizes, but we can just leave it at that size. That's good enough to start with. And then you click that and it will give you, once you select your screen size or your size that you're going to build with, it builds a new screen, which is larger than the old screen, and shows you what you selected in the middle. Now this is called an artboard in the center, and it's got a default name called iPad 1. If you don't like that name, you can double click on it and call it Screen 1 if you want. Hit enter and it'll rename it for you. The idea is that you've got various drawing tools over on the left of the screen. The little arrow up at the top is kind of a move or grab control. So let's start by selecting a rectangle, and that changes our mode, so we are now going to be drawing a rectangle. So let's say we want to draw a rectangle at the top of the screen. We can do it like this, and we can release it. Now, when you've selected an item, over on the right-hand side, you see a control panel for it. And you can do all kinds of things with it. So if you want to change the fill, you can click on the fill color here, and it'll bring up a little thing, and you can say, oh, I would like to see some kind of a yellow. And then you can click in there somewhere to pick the kind of yellow you would like. That's a little too, no. I want something like that, but I would really like it fainter, so we should be able to move it down like that, and get it in here, a nice shade of yellow like you might get on a pad of paper. Okay, so once you're finished with that, you should be able to click that, and now that becomes the shade of it. Now, you see these little controls here, and they allow you to round the corners of your rectangle. So if you just click one by itself, it will round all of the corners. You can move it back. But if you go and press Alt and click one of them, should let you move just that one corner more than the rest. So you can create either all equally rounded corners, or you can create one corner more than the rest. You can actually create semicircles this way, and you can do various techniques. So that's the basic idea of working with rectangles. One of the things you have to remember about XD is it works the way most Adobe tools work. So let's just take a circle, and as we start to draw a circle, it gives us like an oval, but as soon as I press Shift and adjust it, it turns into a perfect circle, and it stays as a perfect circle. So in most Adobe tools, when we press Shift while we're doing something, it causes it to be constrained. So for lines, they could be constrained horizontally or vertically. For ellipses, they're constrained to be circles. And for rectangles, they're going to be constrained to be squares. And that's all done by holding down the Shift key while you drag the buttons to change its size. You can go in, and there's still ways to change the fill and the border color, change shadows, do all kinds of things over here if you want to. You can change the opacity to make it partially see-through. Another thing you can do is a repeat grid. So if you decide you want several of these, you can click repeat grid. And it gives you two handles, a vertical one and a horizontal one. So I'm going to use the horizontal one, and I'm just going to drag. And what you're seeing is it is creating copies of it. So we'll just say 3 copies is enough. And then if we go in there, there's a spacer between them. And you can change that by dragging on it to make the space greater or less, depending on what you want. And when you're finished, you can say ungroup them. That gets rid of your handles to drag them. They're still put in a group so you can move them around if you want to finally position them. So maybe you want to put them all in the center up there or something like that. And then if you want to ungroup them, they go back to being individual things that you can then move on their own. Notice the little lines appear to help you line things up. If you don't want things lined up, you don't have to, but that's an idea. They've got things for triangles. And so if I create a triangle, it's going to look like that. But as soon as I press Shift, it should turn into an equilateral triangle like that. And now I can line up a little triangle with my other things. And it's got a little thing in there I can pull. And if I do that, I will get a rounded triangle like that. So there's always things you can do to manipulate different shapes. Lines are just lines. So if I start to draw a line here, I get a line, but I'm going to say Shift, and it will constrain it to be horizontal. It'll go usually goes horizontal or vertical, depending which one you're closest to when you hit the Shift. Then I can modify that line. I can say the border color should be a shade of blue, maybe a dark blue like that. And I can say the size should be 5, so it's a fairly thick line. And maybe we want a dash. I haven't tried dash 1. See what that does. And then maybe put a gap of 2. So it spaces them out, and maybe the dash becomes 3. Should make wider dashes. So you're controlling the size of the dashes and the gaps between them to make dash lines, whatever. There's things for controlling the ends, the shape, whether you want them to be square ends or rounded ends. You can put shadows on them. So we put a shadow on it. It creates a little tiny shadow, but you can barely see underneath there. And you can play with the shadow color there to make it appear more or less. You can play with the opacity, so it becomes partially see-through. And that's kind of a good start of what we can do with that. If you want to do really wild shapes, you can use the pen tool. And the pen tool gives you a series of points that you can draw with and build some kind of really interesting shape like that. Now, you can also go in and drag those once they're down there, but if you double click on them, you'll get one of these Bezier curve manipulators, and then you can really start to have fun. And you can try and figure out how to do what you want with a Bezier curve, but you can draw almost any kind of curve with these. So then you can just click that when you're done. Now you've got a curved shape. If you go in, you can double click to go back into edit mode. You can drag these around a little more, and you can play with it until you get the arbitrary shape you want. Okay. The text, lets you type text just about anywhere. You can change it to be, go for bold. And maybe we'll go for, I don't know, 35. Which hopefully might have to highlight it. Right, so you have to highlight it to have it apply. Go for bold on that. Then you should be able to actually go back to your little drag button and move this up there. Okay, so now you've got text on top of a little box. This over here is like a set of layers, what's on top of what. If things are not on top of one another in the order you want, you can drag things over here to put things on top of something else. So if the word Seneca was underneath that rectangle, then you could change the order in this layers palette over here on the left. Now, if you want to create a new artboard, you click this. Oh, I also want to tell you about some basic navigation before we do that. So if you want to zoom in or zoom out, all Adobe tools work on Control plus and Control minus. Control plus goes in, Control minus goes out. And that is common to most Adobe tools. So if you're ever in doubt about how to do basic navigation, just assume it works like most Adobe tools. Another way that's very common in Adobe is if you want to pan around and move, you hit the Shift key and then use your mouse and drag, and then you can drag things around the screen. Okay, so let's create a new artboard. And normally it just creates it to the right of the artboard we just selected. So we'll make sure this artboard is selected. We'll create a new one. It says, what do you want? I'm just going to say we want an iPad just like we had before. So now I get a new iPad. Now I can go in there and I can add a rectangle to it. Actually, what I'll do is I'll add some text first because I want to show you how we can change the order of things. And I'm just going to say that this is going to be a back button. And then what I want to do is I want to make it look like a button by drawing a rectangle around it. So I'm going to put a rectangle around it. And it doesn't look like a button, it looks like a rectangle. So I did that in that order so I could show you that I should be able to take the text back. I'll just go back to this. I'll take the text back and move it in front of the rectangle. And then that puts back on top of the rectangle, and now I can see it. So if things ever get in the wrong order, you can reorder them in that way. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to show you how we can actually turn this into a working prototype. So up here, we've got design and prototype, and so far we've been in design. So now I'm going to go into prototype. And as soon as I go into prototype, things start to get these little controls on them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this whole thing, and I'm going to drag out of here. And as soon as I drag, it gives me an arrow, and I'm simply going to say, go over here. And up here, it says that's going to happen on a tap. So because I'm on a tablet device, I've got taps. Depending on the device you have, you'll have different kinds of inputs suitable for that particular type of device. So what this means is if anybody does a tap on this rectangle, it's going to cause you to go back to that screen. Now I'm going to go to this screen and I'm going to go in here, hook on to that, and say you are going to go to this screen. And once again, it's on a tap. So now, if I click on the Seneca button, it should take me to the second screen. If I click on the back button, it should take me back to the first screen. So in order to see this operating, I can do it now, or I can do it in design. I'll go back to design. And up here is a desktop preview. So that's going to let me play the prototype to see how it actually works. So I'm going to do that. And it gives me a sort of outside your viewing area, but it gives me this live screen. And if I click around, it doesn't do anything until I click up here. When I click up here, it takes me to the second screen that says back. I can click around. It does absolutely nothing until I click in here, and then it takes me back to the first screen. So this is how I can prototype transitions between various screens by programming different rectangles or text or whatever to act like buttons. So I'm just going to get rid of this animation. And after we get our prototype up and running, we can save it. You go to the hamburger menu on Windows. Excuse me, if you have a Mac, you've got a different kind of menu that pops up at the top. And you can do a save as, and that will save it as an Adobe XD file, and then you can share that with other people.